Good day, everyone. Glad to have you here for another Live with Kevin. First time we've done one at this time of day in a while, 9 a.m. Eastern time. But I'd really like to know where you're from, so we'll find out what time it is for you. Wherever you happen to be watching, if you'll just go into the comments of your social platform of choice and just tell us hello, tell us where you're watching / listening from, that would be fantastic. And I do that for two reasons. I really would like to know where you are, but I'd also like you to get used to using those fingers, because I hope that during the next 30 or so minutes that this is an interactive conversation. I'll bring our guest in a couple of minutes. But as long as you're here, I want you to imagine that you are joining us around a table in person for a cup of coffee. And if you did that, you wouldn't just listen to Dave and I. If you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. So why not do that here through the magic of typing on your keyboard? So if you have a comment, an idea, a question, share them. It'll make for a better conversation, hopefully make for a better podcast, and make it more valuable for you. And yes, if you didn't notice, up over the corner of my shoulder in the corner of the screen, you will see that this is on a podcast. Eventually, you may only be thinking about this as a live stream, but eventually it will be a podcast. Excuse me, on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And so, of course, if I could have held that sneeze a little longer, it wouldn't have been in the here at all. But it won't be on the podcast, because we'll trim it, all of what I've said so far, starting with this. So, Marissa, we'll start in 3, 2, 1. Delegation. We know how to do it. We know we need to do it. And some of us find it hard to do or haven't been very successful in doing it. And delegation is our focus today. That foundational skill that we as leaders often mess up or avoid. Even if you consider yourself a good delegator, I promise you there will be nuggets for you here today on another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future for episodes live as we live stream them on our likely your favorite social media channel. You can get access to those lives, know when they're taking place by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, though those aren't the only two places that we actually do stream these. You can join us on remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all those details in the future. Our episode today is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses, picked from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. You can learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, I'm going to bring in my guest. He's right here. I'll introduce him, say a couple things, and then we will dive in. So Dave Kerpen is our guest today. He's a serial entrepreneur, New York Times bestselling author, and a global keynote speaker. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of Apprentice, a platform connecting entrepreneurs with top college students, and is the author of several best-selling books, including The Art of People, Likeable Social Media, and Likeable Business. He's a popular contributor to places like Inc.com. He is a LinkedIn influencer and has been featured in many media outlets, including the New York Times, the Today Show, the CBS Early Show, and lots more. He is the executive chairman of the Nursing Beat and the co-founder and CEO of Remembering Live. He was previously the founder and chairman of Likeable Local and was the co-founder and CEO of Likeable Media, which was sold in 2021. He was the third guest ever on this podcast in July of 2016. So if you're watching or listening to this on the podcast, almost 8 years later, he's back to join us again. We've done some other work together in the past, but today he's here to talk with us about his newest book, Get Over Yourself: How to Lead and Delegate More Effectively for More Time, More Freedom, and More Success. Dave, welcome back.
Kevin. Thank you. Great to be back. Great to see you. Thanks for the wonderful intro, and great to see you again. 8 years. It's been too long.
Well, and yeah, we have done a couple things in between. We've done a couple of webinars. We've done a LinkedIn Live from your perspective, as I recall. Worked with some of your apprentices and some of that, but we'll get to maybe some of our history a little bit. But really, where I want to go now is a little bit into your history. Specifically, I'm curious, why did you decide to write a book about delegation?
Yeah. So this is my fifth book, and um, as you mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started all these companies, and in many of my companies, I've worked with a lot of small businesses. And so I would say in my journey over the last 20 years, I have encountered um, and worked with, talked with, coached, mentored um, a little over 1,000 entrepreneurs and small business owners and leaders at different companies. And the number one issue that I have seen pop up over and over and over again is challenges around delegation. And it just seems that so many folks struggle with this. They either do the work all themselves and refuse to delegate, or are incapable of delegating, or scared of delegating, or the opposite problem, they delegate and then they micromanage and they oversee, and they have a lot of challenges with being too involved. And so I wrote this book because my hope is that I can help people get over themselves and better delegate. And for me, the stakes are high, Kevin. It's not just about building a better business or being more efficient with your work or being more productive. It's about freeing up your time and prioritizing your life, right? People talk about, do you live to work or work to live? My hope is that with this book, people will get mentally right, better delegate, and be able to prioritize either time with their kids or time with their grandkids or time finding a spouse or time exercising, whatever it is that you prioritize. My hope is that through delegation, you'll be able to better focus on that in your time. And because we only get one life, we only get one shot at this. And I just hope people will be able to spend their time in more meaningful ways than perhaps they're spending it right now.
So tell us a little bit, Dave, like, people often say, well, if you can't do, teach, right? You've heard that before. I'm curious about your own. I mean, you talk about it in the book, so I sort of know the answer. But I think to the audience, it might be useful to know a little bit about your own delegation journey. Like, no one, my experience is that, much like yours, that leaders struggle with this, and on either end of that spectrum, as you described. And so it's for almost all of us, it's a journey. So tell us a little bit about your delegation journey.
Sure. So I was an accidental entrepreneur. My wife and I got married at a baseball stadium. We had a sponsored wedding. It was a huge hit, and literally after our wedding, our vendors that had sponsored the wedding, 1-800-Flowers.com, that had sponsored our flowers, and Entenmann's that had sponsored our desserts, said, this was great. We got so much media. What are you going to do next? We couldn't get married again, so we started a business. And we started this business. We're running a marketing firm. It's called the K-Buzz Den. It was then changed to Likeable before it was sold a couple of years ago. And all of a sudden, we had all this work to do and this business and this opportunity that we kind of stumbled into. We also had a young child at home. And while we were excited about the business opportunity, we kind of started the business so that we would have the ability to go home and be with our kid. And as these opportunities arose, all of a sudden we found our priorities shifting, and all of a sudden we were spending all this time at the office, and we were like, "What the heck are we doing this for? This is backwards." And I think I'm really, really grateful that we had that insight, Kevin, because I think a lot of people just fall into this trap, and all of a sudden, it's years and years later, and maybe they didn't shift their mindset and they didn't shift their ways. Well, fortunately, it was pretty early on in our first business that my wife and I said, if we're going to have the time to spend with our young, basically baby, she was 1 at the time. If we're going to have time, we're going to have to figure out a way to delegate. We can't do this work ourselves. And we couldn't afford to hire full-time staff either. So it was a conundrum. And that's probably the biggest pushback I get from folks is like, well, I can't afford to hire someone. I can't afford to bring on somebody else. Fortunately, we figured out that we could bring in college students. We could pay them part-time to work as interns. And they were really, really smart. And we called them buzz builders. And at one point, we had 60 of them running around in this small Queens office and just like 2 or 3 full-time staff. And we were able to let go. And honestly, they made some big mistakes along the way. So that part's scary. But we were able to let go, give them the work, and have that time with our child, which was key. And then, of course, as the business grew, we had more and more needs, and we were able to find the resources to bring on more senior folks over time. And I've done this a number of times, of course, with various different businesses. And for me, where's my journey today? I am so fortunate, Kevin, because I have set some very, very strict boundaries about my working time and my non-working time. 3 o'clock every day, I'm off, and I'm picking my son up off the bus, and I'm spending the afternoon with my son. I'm doing his homework with him and taking him to sports activities and taking care of him. And that might mean that I'm unable to build as big a business as I would have otherwise. It might. But for me, it means that I'm delegating work to be done during that time. I'm prioritizing, and I'm being very strict about those boundaries. And for me, that works. My hope is that, maybe some of your listeners or some of my readers will have an aha moment at some point, and they'll think, this is what I really want to prioritize with my time. How do I get there? Maybe delegation, maybe trusting someone, maybe giving somebody else some work to do might be a way to solve that.
Yeah, we could probably spend the rest of our time talking about all the reasons why people don't or hesitate in doing it. Although if you're listening, you could go back and listen to the first 10 minutes and you'd find a bunch of clues already. So I really want to go past that, Dave, because I'm guessing that if people are listening at some level, they'd like to get better at this, and they may have, and most people I've found know why they're stuck here. I mean, part of it is getting over yourself, which is, of course, the title of the book. But I want to go past that a little bit, and because you've been extolling the virtues of this now for 10 minutes. So the question is, what shouldn't we delegate?
Yeah. So there are, in my opinion, just 3 things that we shouldn't delegate. And I'll tell you a funny story about that, because I got into an argument with my editor about it. But the 3 things that I believe that we should not delegate are the strategy and vision. And when I say this, Kevin, if you're an entrepreneur, it's for your company. If you're a manager at a company, it's for your team, for the group that you supervise. So the 3 things that we should not delegate are the strategy and vision, the hiring of the right people in the right seats for your team, and the access to resources. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, it's cash in the bank. If you're an employee at a bigger company, it's making sure that you have the headcount and the budget to be able to get the job done. Strategy, hiring, access to resources. Those are the 3 things that we shouldn't delegate, that we should focus on ourselves. Now, I got into an argument with my editor. So a wonderful publisher, Ben Bella, they published Traction, EOS, Gino Wickman, one of the greatest books of all time in the entrepreneurial space. And he personally did the first round of edits for this book, the publisher, which was sort of ironic because he has a big team he could have delegated it to, but he wanted to work on it personally, and I was flattered. So he did the first read of the book, and he came back to me and he said, "Well, Dave, you're saying to only focus on these 3 things, but a lot of people love doing stuff. I mean, don't you love marketing? I mean, if you love doing something, if you're really good at it, isn't that something that you should focus on versus just the strategy, the hiring, and the access to resources?" I said, "Look, you can. I'm not saying you can't do that if you don't want to, but there's a hidden downside to doing things just because you're good at it, just because you enjoy doing it. you're potentially disempowering somebody else who could be doing that.
Yeah, I think that's the key question there. Like, is me making that choice? And I don't love his point of should, right? But could, is how is me making that choice impacting the rest of my team, whether I know it or not? I think that's a really important point.
Exactly. So look, I love marketing. It's true. So I might sit in on my marketing team's meeting, and I might have an idea or two, and I might want to contribute. But the moment that I start taking over and saying, "Oh, it has to be this way, it has to be that way," now I'm interfering. Now I'm really not helping. And I might think I'm helping, but again, it's this idea we have this inner narcissism, Kevin, that we think, all of us, all, and I'm not saying just me, you, or everyone at some level thinks that we're good at stuff. And if we really think about it, okay, I might be pretty good at marketing, but there's lots of people that are as good at marketing as I am or better. And no matter what the talent, what the skill is, chances are there's a lot more people out there that are way better than I am at it. And so if I can humble myself for a moment and say, maybe I'm not the very best person in the world for this, let me try to find somebody better at it, bring them on, well, then everyone wins. So it's not, to your point, it's not necessarily a should. Can you do other stuff? Yeah, you can do everything. You can delegate nothing. And then where does that get you, right? So ultimately, the idea is, in my view, those three things are the things that it's just not a good idea to delegate them, because they're core to the success of the business or the team. So focus on those three things, but to the extent that you can empower somebody else or tools to help do the rest, then it's a good thing.
So it seems then that the logical thing for us to talk about next, Dave, is how. And you say there's 5 C's to doing it, which I love. And here's why I love them, everybody. Because first of all, I love acronyms, and so and I love alliteration. And beyond that, though, I love that not a single one of these is unclear. Like as you describe them, and I want you to unpack them a little bit, but like every one of them is, you're going to say as a listener, oh yeah. But I don't want you to get lost in the, oh yeah, I already know that. I want you to listen to what Dave's going to say, because chances are you're not doing all of them, or you wouldn't still be listening to this conversation, right? So 5 C's of how to delegate effectively.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Well, I'll save my observation till the end. Go ahead and
Okay.
walk through them. We'll do them one at a time. Go ahead.
Okay, great. And I'll start with a quick caveat that the biggest knock on all of my books has been that a lot of the stuff in the books is obvious. Okay, it is. And yet so many folks struggle with it, that on the positive side of my books, and I say this for all of them, including Get Over Yourself, if it were so easy and simple, then everyone would just do it, but they don't. So it serves, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, as a good reminder of what it is that we can focus on.
100%. One of the reasons that we get along, I think, and everybody always remember this, that common sense is not common practice. So it may make common sense to you, but listen carefully. And Dave, I'll put each of the 5 on the screen as you go. So just walk us through the 5 C's.
Great. So the first C is probably the most important of all. And this is where people, I think, make the biggest mistakes. And that's to choose carefully the person or team that you are delegating the work to. The most common mistake here is people do not choose carefully. They choose randomly, arbitrarily, or based on proximity. The closest person around.
Which is a really big deal, especially if your team is virtual.
That's right. You do it. Hey, my cousin is a 22-year-old. They know social media. They do. You do it. Hey, my next door neighbor can do this job because they're right next door. Hey, I happen to have this person on my team now. They didn't really study this. They don't really have the skills, but they're on my team already, so them do it. That is a big mistake. And so we need to really choose carefully. The old adage, hire slow, fire fast, is a good reminder here. Really think about who is the best person or team for the job. It could be an employee, could be a contractor, could be an intern, could be a vendor, could be an agency, could be a consultant, could be somebody off of Upwork or Fiverr. The list goes on and on. So choose carefully the best person or team for the job. That's the first C. The next C is to communicate clearly the outcome, the intended outcome of the project or task. Now, look, some folks get caught up in this. This is micromanaging, and they insist upon communicating clearly every step along the way. I would say that's better than not communicating anything, for sure. But in an ideal world, you're communicating clearly the intended outcome, and you're empowering the person that you've selected to find their own path to that outcome. People do not like being micromanaged. Anyone that's ever had a boss, that many of us, I would implore you all to think back to any time you've had a boss. I know I have had that micromanaged me. It felt horrible, disempowering, frustrating, infuriating at times. Obviously, we don't want to do that in this case, right? We want to make people feel good about their job. So giving them the finish line and letting them figure out how to get there. I like to tell a joke about the New York City Marathon some years ago. Now, I don't advocate cheating to get there, but there was a woman that took the subway, that took the subway to the finish line and then jumped in at the end and ran. And for a moment, people thought she had won the New York City Marathon. Don't take the subway, but empower people to figure out their own path to get to the finish line.
So I'll add one thing to communicate clearly, and that so you're saying communicate the what, not so much the how. But I think oftentimes we need to make sure we're communicating the why as well. Like, where does this fit in? Who does it go to next? How does it get used? Putting that into context. And so much of all of this, everybody, is stuff that you have in your brain. And when you go to communicate it, you're forgetting all the stuff that's obvious to you. You can't, that's where the clearly part comes in.
100% on the why. And it's especially important with this new generation that is the most purposeful sort of generation we've had. But it's important for everyone. People like to feel like there's a greater purpose beyond their work. So motivating them with the why, we're not doing this just because it needs to get done. We're doing this because it's part of this bigger picture. And it's your job as a leader to help communicate that bigger picture and that bigger purpose. So the next C is to coach them along the way.
By the way, we had a question come in, and I think you're going to give the answer here. So I'm going to let that person hang on. Go ahead.
Okay. You're not going to tell me the question. You're just going to assume that I'll give the answer. Hopefully I will.
No, I think you will.
Okay. So there's a big difference in my mind between a manager and a coach. And I just want to take a moment to articulate that. A manager, and many of us may have manager in our titles, a manager manages the work. People in general don't really like managers or management or being managed. But people love coaches. A great coach, for anyone that was ever an athlete as a kid, a great coach motivates and supports and helps you when you're struggling and helps you get in and help accomplish the goal. So if we think of ourselves less as managers and more as coaches and even cheerleaders, helping to coach and cheer our designated person to our designated delegate to get the job done, that's going to be most successful. So Sherry asked, so when do you step in when you don't micromanage? Well, that actually gets into the next C, which is check in regularly. So a big mistake, actually the biggest delegation mistake I've made, which people are always asking, is I sometimes have missed this along the way. Sometimes I go so far in empowering that I say, here's the finish line. I'll see you in 6 months. And the reality is that many people really do appreciate a regular check-in. Now, the check-in is also for you to put your mind at ease, to help you with the trust that's so important and to help you know that things are going along the way. But the check-in's very helpful for the person too, so that you can look at benchmarks, so that you can help course correct if there are challenges. I recommend probably a once a week, depending on the project or task, of course, probably a once a week check-in for 15 minutes, no longer than 15 minutes. And the formula for a great check-in is, hey, how you doing? What kind of progress are you making? Any roadblocks along the way? How can I help you with any of those roadblocks? It's more focused on them and their goals and helping you accomplish your goals. And if you make the check-ins centric around the person and not you, that will be most helpful. And that's not micromanaging. That's really not. So it's a matter of how we think about it too. Go ahead.
So yeah, let me add a comment here. And we talked about, and Dave, you and I talked a lot during the pandemic and all that, and we've sent people to the hinterlands and all that stuff. One of the things that folks who were working at home found is, well, why does my boss keep checking up on me? And so, and it felt like micromanaging. And by the way, micromanagement is always defined by the other person. Like, few people want to be think they're micromanaging, but the others are deciding. But here's the point, that if you will say in your laying out of the process and your clear communication that, hey, why don't we meet once a week for no more than 15 minutes? Now it doesn't feel like people are being checked up on. It feels like they're being checked in with. It totally changes. They may wish for a different timeline than that, but they understand what the timeline is. It also holds us accountable for making sure we do it, right?
That's right. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen daily, hourly texts. How's everything going? What's going on? What's the latest? People can't even focus on their job. That's insanity. We have to take a step back and give people the space to succeed or fail, by the way, but to learn along the way and grow and make some mistakes and ultimately to succeed. And that's people are going to, if people succeed at 90%, that's great, which gets us to my fifth C, which is also, I would say, the second most commonly forgotten part of this, which is at the end of the task, congratulate them. Like, don't just move on to the next thing. Like, take a moment to say, this was awesome. Here are the 5 things that you did best. Here's the one thing that I noticed that I think next time along the way we can improve upon. But by the way, amazing job. Thank you so much. Right. I get into the book and with Enneagram and what people are motivated by, but think through what your person here is most motivated by, and then give them that feeling of success and that feeling of pride, that feeling of getting the job done. And then after that, you can move on to the next project or task.
Yeah, and let's say it's a process that you've handed them, right? And they're going to keep doing it. One of the things that I have found is that when we're able to do what you said earlier, which is let go of the how and let them figure out the how, then one of the things we can do in the congratulate is, hey, you know what? You did that differently than me, and I think it worked every bit as well. That worked better. Like, that's a better way to do it than I'm glad that I didn't try to prescribe my way on you because you found a better way. And like, that statement in and of itself can be really powerful to people.
Totally.
It totally reminds us to keep ourselves out of it as well and get over ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, when we have that attitude, then we earn some credibility to actually say, you know what, that was better than I would have done it. As we continue iterating on the process, here's a couple more ideas to think about. Maybe you can make this process even better next time around in a way that doesn't feel like micromanaging, because we've earned the credibility by letting them figure it out on their own and giving them the positive feedback on that.
You and I could have a much longer conversation on this than probably anyone else wants to listen to, or that we're going to spend time on this morning. But I do wonder if there's anything I didn't ask that you wish I would have.
Oh, that's one of my favorite interview questions, because it's like super open. Hey, yeah, you know what? I was surprised, Kevin, that we didn't get into the emotional detractors at all. And I would just say that for anyone that's watching or listening and thinking, I know I need to do this, but I'm still not there. It's just not there. I get into the book a lot about the fear and the trust issues that hold most people back. And I would just say that it's okay if you're feeling afraid. It's scary. It's really scary to hand things over to other people. It's really, really scary to hand things over to other people that you don't yet fully trust. And I totally get it. And yet, if we are going to be successful in this mission, we're going to have the courage to struggle with our fear and our trust and our control and our perfectionism issues, all of which I get into in the book, and then move through them and get over ourselves and deal with it.
100%. And there's no doubt that those barriers exist. And I think what you said, Dave, is really important, is that if you're listening or watching and you're feeling those, know that you're not alone, and know that when you get a copy of Get Over Yourself, you will get all of those details as well, without question. So I do have a couple other questions though, Dave, before we finish, and they're sort of, we're sort of shifting gears now. And one of those is, what do you do for fun? You mentioned your son in the 3 to 6 p.m. slot, but like, what else do you do for fun? Because now that you've figured out how to delegate for more time, freedom, and success, you have more time for fun. What do you spend on some of that time on?
I do. I play tennis twice a week. I play poker. Well, I host a poker game once a week, and I watch a lot of baseball, both with my son and watching my son play, and then watching the Mets. Sadly, well, once in a while, happily, and too often, sadly, but it's still fun along the way. And then I do date night with my wife every week as well.
Perfect. The only thing you knew for sure I was going to ask you is, what are you reading? So what's something you're reading now or you've read recently, Dave?
So I'm a huge Adam Grant fan. I've read all of his books, and Hidden Potential, his latest, is what I'm devouring right now, and I just love it. It's so inspiring.
He is fantastic, and that book is wonderful. And that, along with some others that have been mentioned in the show, including Traction, will be in the show notes. And of course, in the show notes, we will also have information about this book, Get Over Yourself. I'll ask you this, Dave, where do you want to point people? Where can they learn more about what you're up to, get connected with you? Like, where do you want to send people?
So many options. One of my personal core values is responsiveness. So anyone that reaches out to me on social media with my name, Dave Kerpen, I'm happy to answer your question. I also do open office hours every Thursday afternoon. Anyone in the world that wants to chat with me and get some free coaching, absolutely no strings attached. I've been doing this for 11 years now, and I've met with over 850 people. They can go to scheduledave.com. If folks want to learn more about Apprentice, which is our firm that connects leaders to college students, top college talent to do work that you can delegate to, you can check that out at chooseapprentice.com. And of course, all my books, including Get Over Yourself, are available on Amazon and bookstores everywhere.
And you can even go to getoveryourselfbook.com, right?
I didn't even think of that. Thank you, Kevin.
One that I put in that's the one that I put in the lower thirds. Listen, before we go, everybody, I have a question for all of you who are watching or listening. And it's the question I ask you every week. And the question is, now what? What are you going to do with this? Maybe you realize, hey, I need to get over myself and think a little bit more about why it is that I'm not delegating, or why have I stopped because I had a bad experience, or who do I need to be choosing now for this next project or this next thing I need to delegate, whatever it is. Like, you need to go back and think about what you got in terms of what actions you will take, because it's only then that this will ultimately make a difference for you in your work, to give you, as Dave says, more time, more freedom, more success. I would add more satisfaction. And so it's my hope that you will do that, because when you do, the time that you've just invested with Dave and I will be far more valuable than it would be otherwise. Dave, thanks so much, as always, for the time. Glad to have the chance to visit with you again and to share some of the thoughts about this really, really important topic that sometimes people really do get stuck on. And so all of you that are here, if you found this valuable, invite someone else to come join and listen into this episode, or to just subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. You know how to do that. Wherever you're watching or listening, subscribe so you don't miss any in the future, because we're here every week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everyone.